Welcome back to our latest deep dive into the source material. We're really thrilled to have you joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for tuning in.
If you are prepping for a big meeting or maybe just catching up on the inner workings of government, or honestly, if you're just curious about the invisible forces that actually dictate how the world runs, you are in the exact right place.
For sure.
Because today we are exploring a single, incredibly dense, but absolutely vital subject. We are looking at the comprehensive history, the jurisdiction, and the modern makeup of the United States Senate Committee on Finance.
That is right. And I know what you might be thinking right off the bat.
Right, a detailed breakdown of a Senate committee.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like the kind of dry bureaucratic entity that most people just gloss over in a high school civics class.
Totally.
But our mission today is to take this information from our sources and reveal it for what it truly is.
Exactly. We are going to show you how this specific committee acts as the hidden engine behind almost every single aspect of your financial and physical life in America.
It really is. And if you picture the history of this committee, I want you to imagine a shifting montage behind me, like transitioning from the dusty marble columns of 19th century Washington directly into the flashing, high-speed digital ticker tapes of today's global markets.
Oh, I love that visual.
Because this is considered one of the absolute most powerful committees in the entirety of Congress.
The stakes here are as high as they get. I mean, we are talking about the fundamental economic architecture of the United States.
Yeah.
They hold the levers to the machinery that keeps the nation running, and they have for over 2 centuries.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand the sheer scale of what this committee does, we have to look at its jurisdiction.
Right.
When you look at the standing rules of the Senate, specifically Rule XXV, the scope of what this single committee controls is just vast.
It's massive.
Yes, they handle taxation and revenue measures, but it's not just taxes. They control the national bonded debt.
Right.
They oversee customs, collection districts, and every single port of entry and delivery in the country.
Every single one.
Yeah. They manage the deposit of public monies, reciprocal trade agreements, tariffs, and import quotas.
It is a massive portfolio.
Okay.
And to bring this directly to you, the listener, we need to explain why those specific bureaucratic terms actually matter to your daily routine.
Exactly. Why should anyone care?
Right. Because of that jurisdiction, this committee oversees the major social safety nets that touch nearly everyone's lives at some point. We are talking about National Social Security. We're talking about Medicare and Medicaid.
Yeah.
They oversee the Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP, and temporary assistance for needy families.
Which is huge.
It is. These are the foundational programs that dictate healthcare finance and economic survival for millions of Americans.
And there is a really nuanced rivalry here when it comes to the congressional balance of power, specifically between the Senate Finance Committee and its counterpart over in the House of Representatives.
Ah, the House Committee on Ways and Means.
Right. Now, by constitutional design, all revenue-raising measures must originate in the House.
Right. The House has the power of the purse initially.
Exactly. That gives the Ways and Means Committee a slight edge when it comes to initiating tax policy. But the Senate Finance Committee has a broader jurisdiction in another massive area, which is health.
What's fascinating here is how that jurisdiction is actually split.
Yeah, break that down for us.
You see, the House Ways and Means Committee only has jurisdiction over Medicare.
Okay.
If you want to talk about Medicaid in the House, you have to go to a completely different group, the House Energy and Commerce Committee.
Oh, wow.
Right. But the Senate Finance Committee, they have jurisdiction over both Medicare and Medicaid.
That is a lot of concentrated power.
It gives them an unbelievable amount of concentrated leverage over healthcare in America, which means any major reform to how Americans get their healthcare essentially has to pass through their doors.
Precisely. And on top of that legislative power, they have massive oversight authority.
Right. They don't just write the laws.
No, they continually review and evaluate the agencies that implement those laws.
Look who.
That includes the IRS, the Department of the Treasury, and United States Customs and Border Protection.
So they're the ones holding the hearings and demanding answers when those agencies falter.
It is basically the ultimate power of the purse. But, they didn't just stumble into this level of authority overnight.
No, definitely not.
To understand how they built this empire, we have to travel back to the post-war inception of the committee.
And we are talking about the aftermath of the War of 1812 here.
Right. The committee was originally formed on December 11th,
It
1815.
was a select committee initially, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was called the Committee on Finance and a Uniform National Currency. Their entire job was to just clean up the economic mess left by the war.
And then they officially became a standing committee on December 10th, 1816.
And in those early days, they had power over tariffs, taxation, banking, currency issues, and appropriations.
They were the financial problem solvers for a very young, very financially unstable nation.
Yeah, they were heavily involved in the most heated topics of the era, including the bank war.
Oh, the bank war. That was the fierce, defining political battle of the 1830s, right? Over whether the United States should operate a central national bank to regulate the economy.
Exactly.
But wait, if they were primarily focused on things like central banking and tariffs, how do they end up influencing the creation of the Department of the Interior in 1849?
Yeah, that does sound weird.
That sounds like a completely different wheelhouse.
It does sound like a pivot, but it makes perfect sense when you consider the mechanics of government.
How so?
When you control the money, you get a say in how the government expands its footprint and manages its domestic resources.
Oh.
The creation of the Department of the Interior required significant financial restructuring to manage public lands and native affairs. And the Finance Committee was the bottleneck for those funds.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the committee's true trial by fire came during the Civil War.
Oh, absolutely.
During this era, the committee was under the leadership of Chairman William Pitt Fessenden.
Right.
Under his watch, this committee essentially became the financial war room for the Union.
Yeah, they really did.
They appropriated all the funds for the war effort and had to figure out how to actually conjure that money out of thin air to keep the military afloat.
The sheer scale of that crisis forced incredible financial innovations out of this committee.
Because they couldn't just rely on the old ways of doing things.
Not at all. To finance the war, they raised funds through tariffs, but they also created the nation's very first income tax. And, perhaps most fundamentally, through the Legal Tender Act of 1862, they introduced the nation's first reliance on paper currency.
So you're telling me the paper money in my wallet right now only exists because a Senate committee was scrambling to fund the Union Army?
Exactly. The concept of federal income tax, the greenbacks we use to buy our groceries,
Yeah.
these were born out of wartime necessity. They were engineered by this specific committee to keep the country from fracturing permanently.
They literally had to invent modern American monetary policy on the fly.
That puts an entirely new perspective on the cash in our pockets, doesn't it?
It really does. But right after the war, they actually took a major structural blow.
Right.
In 1865, the House created an appropriations committee to take some of the burden off of Ways and Means, and the Senate followed suit shortly after in 1867. They formed the Senate Appropriations Committee, which officially stripped the Finance Committee of its appropriations power.
So they could raise the money, but they were no longer the sole group deciding exactly how every penny was spent.
True, they lost the power to spend. But even with the loss of that signature duty, they remained central to the nation's biggest debates.
Right.
Throughout the late 19th century, the committee was at the absolute center of the silver question.
Yes. The silver question. Right. The debate over whether to back American currency with silver to cause inflation, which was meant to help farmers and debtors pay off their loans.
Spot on. The committee had to manage that massive economic pressure through legislation like the Bland-Allison Act and the Sherman Silver Purchase Act.
Which essentially forced the government to buy millions of ounces of silver every month.
Exactly. The silver cause would eventually fail by the end of the century, returning the country firmly to the gold standard.
Right.
But it proves that all rows of economic panic still led right through the Finance Committee's doors.
Which brings us to one of the most chaotic legislative battles in American history.
Oh, this is a good one.
The fight for the permanent income tax.
So the original Civil War income tax we just talked about, that was repealed in the 1870s once the crisis passed.
Right. They didn't need it anymore.
Fast forward to 1894, and the committee passes a new income tax law to make up for revenue lost by lowering tariffs.
Okay.
But then the Supreme Court steps in. In the 1895 case of Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust Co., the court strikes down the income tax.
And the reasoning here is crucial. They ruled it unconstitutional because it wasn't based on apportionment.
Meaning the tax wasn't proportionally tied to the population of each state.
Exactly. Under the strict constitutional rules at the time, any direct tax had to be divided among the states according to their population.
Which makes sense on paper, but in practice.
In practice, a federal wealth or income tax is mathematically unworkable under those rules because a smaller, wealthier state would pay disproportionately less per capita than a larger, poorer state.
Wow.
Basically, the court told the committee they couldn't tax individual income under the current framework of the Constitution.
Which sets up one of the most incredible legislative maneuvers in history.
Yeah, it really does.
The fight finally culminated with the Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act of 1909. The chairman of the Finance Committee at the time was Nelson Aldrich.
Okay.
He was deeply conservative and actually opposed an income tax, but he really wanted to pass his protective tariff,
So he made a deal.
a massive political trade-off. He allowed for a constitutional amendment for an income tax to be passed by Congress and sent to the states.
Fully expecting the states to reject it, right?
Exactly. He thought it would die in the states.
But his gamble failed.
Big time.
4 years later, that trade-off changed the country forever. The 16th Amendment was officially ratified by the states, removing that apportionment requirement.
And in 1913, the nation's first peacetime income tax was instituted.
A completely permanent alteration to the United States Constitution, all born out of a strategic compromise over a tariff bill in the Finance Committee.
It's wild. And around that same time, the committee's portfolio shifted again.
Right. They lost jurisdiction over banking and currency to the newly created Banking and Currency Committee.
But they pivoted to an area of massive social importance, which was veterans.
They passed the War Risk Insurance Act of 1917, which fundamentally shifted how the government treated its soldiers.
How so?
It moved pensions away from being seen as mere gratuities or gifts and established them as actual earned benefits.
That's a huge distinction.
It was. It also served as one of the first life insurance programs created under the federal government.
Wow.
Later, they helped consolidate the scattered bureaucracy into what would eventually become the Veterans Administration, and they passed the 1924 bonus bill to compensate World War I veterans.
All of this effort reached an absolute crescendo in 1944. Senator Bennett Champ Clark, who was the chair of the Subcommittee on Veterans, assured the smooth sailing of a monumental piece of legislation.
The Servicemen's Readjustment Act.
Exactly. We all know it today as the GI Bill.
And it is hard to overstate the impact of the GI Bill. Before this, returning veterans often had to march on Washington just to demand basic compensation for their service.
Right.
The GI Bill ended those traditional demands by providing unprecedented systemic benefits. It wasn't just a cash handout.
Right. It was way more than that.
It provided massive funds for continuing education, meaning a whole generation of soldiers went to college who otherwise never could have afforded it.
Incredible.
It offered low-cost mortgages and provided unemployment insurance.
It fundamentally re-engineered American society.
Yeah.
I mean, it practically built the modern American middle class, moving millions of families into homeownership and higher education.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at their massive impact during the Great Depression.
Right.
Because as much as they built the middle class, a committee's actions can also make a crisis significantly worse.
Yeah, we have to talk about the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act.
We do.
At the beginning of the Great Depression, the committee, under Chair Reed Smoot, pushed this act through. Following the traditional economic practices of the time, they felt they needed to protect domestic American businesses from foreign competition.
Right, by slapping massive tariffs on imported goods.
Exactly. But it backfired spectacularly.
It really did.
It greatly increased tariffs, which prompted immediate retaliation from other countries.
It choked off international trade just when the global economy desperately needed liquidity.
And the economic situation of the Great Depression worsened significantly. It is widely considered a disastrous legislative blunder.
But the way they fixed it is just as important as the mistake itself.
Right.
In 1934, they passed the Reciprocal Tariff Act, which essentially replaced Smoot-Hawley.
But it didn't just lower tariffs, did it?
No, it did something structurally radical. It authorized the president to directly negotiate trade agreements with other nations.
This effectively transferred the day-to-day granular trade-making policy from Congress directly to the executive branch.
Yeah.
They handed away a piece of their own constitutional power to bypass congressional gridlock, setting up the entire global trade policy system exactly as it exists today.
And while they were rewiring global trade, they were also serving as the legislative foundation for Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal.
Right.
They received jurisdiction over the National Industrial Recovery Act because it involved tax code changes.
Now, that specific act ultimately failed and lost public support, but it birthed the Wagner Act and the National Labor Board, which fundamentally changed labor rights.
And, crucially, they handled the 1935 Social Security Act.
Which again comes down to a fascinating jurisdictional quirk.
It really
You
does.
only got jurisdiction over Social Security because the new program required a payroll tax to fund it.
Exactly. Because it involved a tax, it fell right into the lap of the Finance Committee.
Wow.
And because of that quirk, the committee became the architect of the first massive effort by the federal government to provide sustained benefits to the elderly and the unemployed.
They literally designed the modern social safety net from the ground up.
The sheer weight of that history is immense.
It is. But we need to bring this all the way back to the present day.
Yes.
Today is Wednesday, March 4, 2026. We are currently in the 119th Congress.
Okay.
And the structural makeup of the committee right now is just as critical to understand as its history. Currently, the committee consists of 27 members. The majority is held by the Republicans with 14 seats, and the minority consists of 13 seats held by 12 Democrats and 1 independent.
The committee is currently chaired by Republican Mike Crapo of Idaho, who took the gavel on January 3, 2025.
Right.
And the ranking member is Democrat Ron Wyden of Oregon.
And just as a quick aside for you listening,
Yeah.
as we talk about who holds the gavel, like Republican Mike Crapo or Democrat Ron Wyden, we are just laying out the architectural blueprint of the committee today.
Exactly. We are totally neutral here. We aren't endorsing any left-wing or right-wing policies, nor are we validating any political viewpoints.
Definitely not.
We are just taking an objective look at who is steering the ship and managing this massive workload in the 119th Congress based on the facts in our source material.
Right. And speaking of that workload, let's look at how these 27 senators actually manage it today. Because they don't just sit in one big room and debate all day.
No, the jurisdiction is far too complex for that.
The workload is highly specialized. They break down into 6 specific subcommittees to handle the sheer volume.
Right.
For instance, you have the subcommittee on energy, natural resources, and infrastructure, which handles the financial incentives and tax structures for massive physical projects.
Then completely separately, you have international trade, customs, and global competitiveness.
Which is entirely different from the subcommittee on healthcare, which obviously handles that massive Medicare and Medicaid portfolio we discussed earlier.
Precisely. Then there is the Subcommittee for Social Security, Pensions, and Family Policy.
Okay.
You have taxation and IRS oversight, which is constantly auditing how the government actually collects its revenue. And finally, fiscal responsibility and economic growth. Each of these subcommittees has its own chair and ranking member, allowing them to drill down into the minutia of these massive national issues simultaneously.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah, let's zoom out.
When you step back and look at the entire journey outlined in this deep dive, we are talking about a single, evolving group of people that started out trying to clean up the financial ruin of the War of 1812.
Yeah.
They figured out how to pay for the Civil War. They created paper money.
They fought an epic, decades-long battle over the income tax that resulted in a permanent change to the Constitution.
They built the GI Bill and, by extension, the modern middle class.
They caused an international trade disaster, fixed it by rewriting how the government functions, and then designed the Social Security safety net that millions of people rely on today.
This raises an important question, and it is something I want you, the listener, to mull over as we wrap up today.
Let's hear it.
Think back to that specific detail from the 1930s. When the committee passed the Reciprocal Tariff Act of 1934 to fix the Smoot-Hawley disaster, it authorized the president to negotiate trade agreements.
Right.
I want you to really think about how a single committee's reaction to a dire economic emergency permanently handed away a massive piece of congressional power to the executive branch.
It is wild to think about.
That split-second historical pivot, born out of economic desperation, still dictates the balance of global power and American trade policy to this very day.
Yeah.
How often do emergency fixes become permanent shifts in power?
That is a phenomenal question to end on. It really puts the weight of history into perspective and shows how decisions made in a panic can govern us a century later.
So the next time you look at the taxes taken out of your paycheck, or the next time you read the news about global trade tariffs or Medicare funding, we hope you have a brand new appreciation for where those decisions actually originate.
They come right from the 27 senators sitting in room 215 of the Dirksen Senate Office building.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time.